incursion underwater to retake an impregnable fortress held by an elite team of U.S. Marines in possession of 81 hostages and 15 guided rockets armed with VX poisoned gas.
A film where some bad people take over a tourist attraction so they can fire gas missiles at a city if their demands aren't met sounds like a great 90s action classic or a major failure of the fast pass system. Things blow up. Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery star in The Rock.
Welcome to The Rock.
Just some terrorists decided to send a little care package, box of goodies, which had to be neutralized before blowing up the office. So I took the rest of the day off.
The thought occurs that to date this channel has not covered a single movie starring Nicolas Cage. Perhaps we should rectify that. Now, it would be easy to go down the path of covering one of the many disappointing gigs he took to cover his financial issues. Or, just look at this poster and try to work out why it's so terrible. But what about the era of good Nick Cage movies, or at least the less obviously crap ones, the ones that over time have remained incredibly popular regardless of their quality due to their sheer entertainment value?
What do you say we cut the chit-chat? A-hole!
And of course, what about Michael Bay, a director whose films are full of explosions so vivid you'd feel like you were there? We haven't covered a Michael Bay film in a while since it's taken all of this time for our eyebrows to grow back.
Blew my eyebrows off, we never saw the cat again.
So, I don't know, let's go with The Rock, where a young star of action films teams up with James Bond. But not actually James Bond, but he's played by a guy who defined James Bond. So he's definitely not James Bond, really.
Oh, I was trained by the best. British intelligence.
Ed Harris is Francis Hummel, a brigadier general in the Marines who's got beef with how the government has handled the deaths of men in his covert outfit. He and a bunch of like-minded Marines take over a facility, non-lethally, using tranquilizer darts and stun guns, though this guy falling from a watchtower onto solid concrete might ask for a more accurate definition of what non-lethal means. Their target is deadly VX nerve agent. Next step, take over Alcatraz, also known as The Rock. It hasn't been a prison for decades, but it is a pretty cool tourist attraction. It also seems an ideal place for Hummel and his cohort to launch missiles carrying VX gas at San Francisco.
Welcome to The Rock, gentlemen.
A direct assault is out of the question, so they need specialists. One is Dr. Stanley Goodspeed, a fast-talking chemical weapons expert for the FBI, and the other apparently is the only man to have ever escaped from Alcatraz, John Mason, who, when he's not in some prison, he's escaping from some other prison. Either way, this film looks really good so far, very stylish, and they didn't really scrimp on the hair pieces. But by this stage, you will have realised the sickening truth that this is an action film and not a paradigm-changing biography of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. On the upside, this film does not star Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, so there is that.
I really believe that anyone who's even thinking about having a child in this world is coldly considering an act of cruelty. What's your news, baby?
I'm pregnant.
I'm sorry?
Mason is an ex-SAS officer and a British agent who's been in prison for decades for failing to give up a microfilm he stole from the Americans. He's also someone who apparently successfully escaped from Alcatraz prison. Mason being Mason, he escapes again.
This is my hobby. I don't want anything, dents or scratches, or I'll have you on.
Leading Stanley and others on a merry chase through San Francisco, which apparently due to local bylaws introduced by former councilman Frank Bullitt obligates any film project lensed in the city to include a car chase down the city's hilliest streets. All of this is in service of Mason having a moment with his estranged daughter Jade in a short scene with British actress Claire Forlani, who just happens to live in the city. Stanley's pregnant fiancée Carla also happens to be in the city. So apart from the million people who will die if the gas missiles hit, the pair have personal reasons to stop the gas attack. Mason of course doesn't yet know this, but Stanley knows all about what a gas attack would do, and he's constantly being reminded that if he's exposed to nerve agent, that he has to jab a syringe into his heart. I mean, this is all there for a reason. I get it, I personally have tried to stop multiple serious gas attacks, but mainly by moderating my intake of cabbage.
Or be prepared to reap the whirlwind, gentlemen.
Stanley is not a field operative, but he's given the job of accompanying the Navy SEAL team led by Michael Biehn, using an unwilling Mason as their guide. Connery gets a lot of lines about The Rock.
You're between The Rock and a hard case.
Possibly because it's in his contract that he shouldn't be asked to say Alcatraz too often. And then in Alcatraz, lots of shootouts happen in different parts of the complex. Firstly, the Navy SEALs are massacred by Hummel's men, some of whom are more bloodthirsty than Hummel, who still thinks he's an honourable Marine, despite going rogue and blackmailing the government with the threat to kill 1 million people. But apart from that,
It's just about the most awful thing I've ever seen.
the missiles are dotted around the island, seemingly unguarded, which allows Stanley to disarm them one by one. Mason and Stanley bicker. They help each other out. They bicker some more, are captured, bicker, and escape, where they, of course, bicker some more. And they are, of course, running out of time. The deadline given by Hummel is about to be reached. The Air Force are going to flatten the island with ordnance that will burn so hot that any nerve agent will be incinerated, along with everything remotely organic.
I don't quite see how you cherish the memory of the dead by killing another million.
Hummel's men are about to mutiny. Oh, the irony, which leads to shootouts and everybody dying. Stanley defuses the last missile, and, I saw that coming, but man, that was great. Mason goes off to live his life, and Stanley and Carla get married in the same church where Mason had stashed the microfilm.
You wanna know what really killed JFK?
Microfilm, microdots, microfiche was such a great boon for espionage and horror movies.
We held him without trial until he gave up the microfilm.
In real life, unless you were researching old newspaper articles in the library, most people would rarely have encountered the technology. So, pour one out to microfilm, made redundant by flash drives. Though, that's exactly what Big Flash Drive wants you to believe.
Jesus, Frank, this is classified information.
So, like many, I have a pretty poor opinion of Michael Bay's films. They're loud, they're obnoxious, filled with loud and obnoxious and usually sweating characters shouting lousy dialogue with terrible jokes that tries to pull together a plot that's barely there. But they're fast-paced, with beautiful photography and editing topped with more fatal explosions than a gender reveal party. The Rock is all of that, but here it mostly works. The characters aren't quite as loud and obnoxious as in other Bay films.
Not very nice, is he?
No, he's not.
And there's an edge here, mainly because this was when Bay still made R-rated films. It's a bit violent in some scenes, but it's the swearing. Fuck me, there's a lot of swearing, which was something that a lot of action films gave up to get a PG-13 rating, which of course opened up the number of potential ticket buyers by tens of millions.
Winners go home and fuck the prom queen.
Well, not that one, obviously. The Rock's plot mostly holds together and doesn't go so over the top that you're pulled out of the experience by going, oh my god, that's bullshit. It's close, but it's also extremely satisfying. The jokes mostly land. Nicolas Cage seems to be in his character more so than Connery. Cage, as Goodspeed, knows his shit, but also he's losing his shit at the idea of going out into the field. Connery seems to be having a grand old time, despite the gags he's been given to say, just feeling so utterly out of character.
Personally, I think you're a fucking idiot.
Connery's lines often feel like they were written by a teenager. In the film, he drops more F-bombs than an Australian trying to put together a Kallax for the first time. Truth be told, Connery makes the word seem, pretty freaking classy.
So just make sure you don't get us all fucking killed.
I will go on record and say that this is Sean Connery's last great role. Not everything he did after this was terrible, but League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, pretty much was, leading to him more or less retiring from films after that film's release in 2003.
I was underground for 3 days, in the dark.
Ed Harris also brings an intensity to Hummel, where he's backed up by Tony Todd, Bokeem Woodbine, John C. McGinley and David Morse. Of course, they all end up splattered, shot or killed one way or the other.
I already dropped them!
The film kind of futzes what happens to the 81 civilian hostages.
Are the hostages alive?
Every one of them.
As in, there was pretty much no way he could have known that one way or the other at that exact moment.
If you can believe that, then it's a start.
The Rock was the last film from the power-producing team of Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. Simpson died just before the film's release, and The Rock features a dedication to him. Bruckheimer would go on to produce many major films on his own, with Bay as director and with others. The late 90s saw a slew of these big action films. They're mostly one-offs which took the format of a buddy 80s cop movie, but often with a really different hook. Once upon a time you just had an action film, and then after Die Hard, many of the big action films needed to have a hook, as in Die Hard in and then insert a location. Then you had to find a different location that hadn't been done before for each subsequent movie. By the late 90s, that became the high-concept action thriller, where it had an unlikely or over-the-top plot which would set the film apart from other movies. For some reason, Nicolas Cage seemed to star in many of them. It seemed for a time as if directors Michael Bay and John Woo were each trying to top each other with each subsequent film, either getting more and more ridiculous. This era of three-letter surname guys trying to top each other didn't leave much room for other directors whose names had more letters. I mean, Michael Bay, what can you say about him that hasn't already been tested in a courtroom?
Dude, can we bring the brewskis?
His highly kinetic and visual style had already been well developed by this point. Bay movies have a lot of lovingly composed shots, moving cameras on dialogue scenes or establishing shots, lots of fast cuts, super tight close-ups of people in cars that aren't moving. He would just utilise various ways of setting the scene without words. And of course, it would become a joke at how empty and vacuous the majority of Michael Bay movies are. You could be thinking to yourself, hey man, it's a popcorn action flick, isn't that enough? But then we have movies like Armageddon or Pearl Harbor or his Transformers movies.
Most of the time, I work in a glass jar and lead a very uneventful life. I drive a Volvo, beige one.
The Rock, that's the film, not the section of the record store frequented by people wearing Eagles t-shirts, does have a killer score by Nick Glennie Smith and Hans Zimmer. Always with the Zimmer.
Hey, the last time I swam this channel, I was your age, so I'm fucked either way.
Alcatraz Island, nicknamed The Rock, that's the island, not the movie or the reason AC/DC is about to salute you, sits in San Francisco Bay and was originally a fort before being turned into the infamous prison from which nobody was known to have successfully escaped. There are questions as to whether 3 escapees in 1962 successfully made it to the mainland, but the prison was closed a year later and eventually became a tourist attraction.
The Rock has become a tourist attraction.
A pretty cool tourist attraction, well worth visiting if you ever visit San Francisco. Just don't get eaten by the enormous killer sea lions. Look, I know they're not literally killer sea lions, but I may have been reading one too many posts made by Bay Area seagulls on Facebook.
Gosh, kind of a lot's happened since then.
Alcatraz has a pop culture allure that other prisons can only dream of. Welcome to the scrubs. The Rock, that's the movie, not the island, or the wrestler, or the losing move in a game of rock, paper, scissors if your opponent chooses paper, proved to be a template of sorts. A lot of action films fed off its blend of high-octane insanity with semi-realistic action and a just plausible plot. But one medium that The Rock absolutely influenced, video games of the 21st century. Any number of military-themed games seem to take notes from this film, most notably Metal Gear Solid and Call of Duty games. So this is Nicolas Cage on top of his game years before his name became a bit of a running gag, like a sprinter telling knock-knock jokes. This is also Connery in his last great action movie. It's a movie from a director who was just on the cusp of being the guy who made empty hollow explosion fests. And the film just has a central premise that was just this side of silly but not silly. It doesn't always happen, but in the case of The Rock, these elements just came together to make a fun, entertaining film.
It's an act of lunacy.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
I'm having kind of a hard time concentrating. Can you do something about it?
Like what? Kill him again?